Hello and welcome to the first in our series of programs about content marketing in the community, not-for-profit and government sectors. Over the coming months, we'll be taking a deep dive into these three very important sectors to local, regional, national and indeed global economies. My name is David Pembroke and I am the CEO and founder of Content Group, and we are coming to you live today from the ACT Government's Digital Hub in Gungahlin, Canberra, Australia. If you'd like to join us in the conversation today, the hashtag is CBR Live, and we'd love to hear your questions throughout the day. Well, joining me in the conversation today about content marketing in the community and not-for-profit sectors are Chris Barry from Communities at Work, Joe Allibone from the YWCA, and Mike Zisler from Lifeline.
Hello.
Before we get going today, team, in terms of the discussion around content marketing, Mike, just tell us a little bit about Lifeline and the problems that you're working to solve.
Lifeline Canberra is part of a national network, and our core business is our telephone crisis service. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week, a year, dealing with people in crisis. So we'll take something like 30,000 calls locally, nearly 700,000 calls nationally from people in crisis, and of course some of those will be considering suicide and indeed in the act of self-harm. So it's very important we get our messages out to the people so they know we're there and they can call us. But as a charity we need to make sure we endeavour to raise funds to run those services. So we're very much in the community, actively getting the message out and indeed saying we're there to help.
Great. Joe?
Sure. Well, the YWCA of Canberra has been providing services to the Canberra community since 1929. We have a few different areas that we work in. We work in community development, so we do a lot of youth engagement in the Tuggeranong region, which is just in South Canberra. We also do a lot of children's services delivery, so we do before and after school care, long day care, out of home care for families. And we also work in policy advocacy, and we're also a registered training organisation, so we do a lot of education and training, particularly around young women's leadership. We're part of a national movement, the YWCA of Australia, and also an international movement. And internationally, YWCA's reach around 25 million women and girls around the world every year.
Great. And Chris, Communities at Work?
Communities at Work is a local organisation, so 36 years ago, grew up in Tuggeranong Valley, principally as the demand for childcare and education services in what was then Nappy Valley, and has grown and evolved to what we are today. And we're a very diverse organisation that works right across Canberra and actually right across the region. We deliver services into Yass and down to Cooma, Jerrabomberra, Queanbeyan, and a diverse range of services. So we're still very engaged in childcare and education, but also other community services, mental health, disability, services that help the disadvantaged and the vulnerable as well.
Okay, and just one more thing I do want to just put a bit of emphasis on before we get started is in fact content marketing. Because Joe, is interesting, we had a conversation, we ran into each other at a luncheon meeting yesterday, and you had people say to you, it's great that you're on a live webcast, but what's content marketing? And I think we are very much in the early days of people becoming familiarised with exactly what content marketing is. So from what your point of view is, what do you see content marketing as?
Well, to me, content marketing is, it's really about storytelling. And it's about storytelling in a really compelling way to a particular audience and with the right channels, I guess. I think one of the things that is really stuck in my mind in thinking about this discussion today is that for not-for-profit organisations, they've actually got a wealth of amazing content at their fingertips. And perhaps it's, with the new technologies that are coming about and the changing media landscape, that NGOs in Australia in particular are just starting to realise the full potential and that they don't have to have a huge budget to do content marketing effectively.
And Mike, your views on content marketing?
Look, absolutely, it is about that storytelling. We have a very important message to give out to the community, but nowadays it's there's so many different ways to go and so many different stories to tell. Lifeline had a history, I suppose, of wanting to keep a lot of it very private and confidential, and of course that's critical to our callers. But what we actually do, we need people to know what we do and how we do it. And there are many people who help us, but they're very different as well. So we've got to make sure we get the core messaging right and consistency. But then we need to go out to the community and say, to parts of that community, this is our message and this is how you might help us, how you might support us. And that's a different message for different people. So we have multiple channels, and we've been working at that for some time now. And we're here very much to learn as well, to hear what other organisations are doing.
Okay, Chris, your version on the new world of content marketing.
I'll build on what's been said already. Content marketing is really around creating value and engagement. I think in the marketing world, it's pretty well known that the traditional channels are slowly dissipating or removing. Traditional advertising is less effective. Print advertising is a dying area. So for us, and as been mentioned, we've got people who are working with us that can tell stories. We've got clients that we deliver services to that can tell their stories, and those stories are so engaging. Those stories are the real connection to our organisation and what we do. And so it's part of our entire, I guess, integrated communications strategy. It's content marketing as a part of that, and what it does is it creates that value and it creates that connection.
Okay, there's a couple of things I would just add to that around content marketing. The first thing is that it's not new, and it's important that people understand that it's not new. It's been around since the middle of the 1800s, where organisations have created content to add value to the organisations, the audiences, the people who they're trying to build trust with. So it's been around for a long time. It is a new phrase. Joe Paluzzi and the team at the Content Marketing World, they were the guys who coined the phrase content marketing in about 2008, 2009. And I think it's a great term. I like it. A lot of people don't like it, maybe because of the marketing thing, but I think it says it all. And I was listening actually to This Old Marketing, which is a podcast of the Content Marketing Institute this morning. And they were discussing the fact that there is some criticism around the phrasing of it. But as Joe and Robert Rose said, you've got to call it something, and that's what it is. And I think the other thing about content marketing is that it's a process, it's not a thing. It starts with strategy. Before strategy, it begins with research. It moves to strategy. Intense focus on audience and understanding who is it that you're trying to get to. So in your case, it's not just the people who are in trouble, it's the corporate people. Right. But then it's channel selection. We now have offline, we've always had offline channels, but now we've got more online channels than we've had before. And then editorial calendars and measurement and evaluation. So it's a process, it's not a thing. And I think people need to really keep that in mind, that when people talk about content marketing, you're talking about an end-to-end accountable methodology. So that's what we're here to talk about today as it relates to community organisations and as it relates to not-for-profits. So we'll get started. So in terms of research, and I'll throw this to you, Ziz, as you're getting your communications ready, how much time and effort in the not-for-profit and community sector do you have to do research?
I think research is very challenging, but you have to do it. We, as I say, take 30,000 calls a year. We have a huge number of volunteers who work for us, and then we have loads of people who come to us and help us as an organisation. And they're very diverse. So we have young people, over the age of 12, I suggest, all the way through to people in their 90s and the 100s, and they all want to engage with Lifeline in some way or another. Clearly, not understanding that demographic, not understanding is what they want from us, what their expectations are, and clearly making sure the message gets through to those different demographics is vital. So by way of example, one of our large and successful fundraisers are our book fairs. We sell books secondhand and it generates significant income for us. We always survey at the back end of the book fairs 1,000 of the people who come to it. That's our target. They're straightforward surveys. Some of it's looking simply at the demographics, who's come, but it's really about who they came with, where they live, what they bought. Do they understand what Lifeline is? So when they're buying the books and giving money, do they know what the root cause is, why we're there? That allows us to target those audiences to come again and be own part of Lifeline. And it's really about that ownership. Lifeline is an association of volunteers. We have a staff, but it's really about the ownership is by the community and it is for the community. The research into that is very, very important. We need to know who the community is. So when we talk to young people, the core message is there, but fundamentally it's a different language, it's a different way of getting to them. We have many supporters in their 80s and 90s, different audience. How do you get to them? And while I agree with Chris, traditional marketing tools have moved on, we still write significant numbers of letters to that audience because they like us to write to them. They like me as a CEO to tell them a story of Lifeline about what we've done in their name, what we've done with their money, so they go, that's wonderful, I feel like I want to do it again. And of course, at the end of the day, it is about that engagement, so they come back and they become to me a true customer. Not just once, they come back and back and back and support us, talk about us, donate, whatever they do for us, we want them to keep coming back.
And Joe, in terms of research, obviously in the community and not-for-profit area, budgets are always something that are challenging. How do you go about researching your audiences?
Yeah, look, I think we take a different approach depending on why we're doing the research. So, for example, at the moment, we're really looking at ways that we can grow our membership in Canberra. Our members are really, really important to us. And we also know that our membership is very diverse. So, in terms of demographics, in terms of interests, and we really wanted to find out more about them so that we could ensure that our membership offering was appropriate, and then we would actually be able to set some goals around how we were going to grow it and have some, a reasonable degree of confidence that we could reach those goals. So actually on Saturday, we're holding a design thinking workshop with some of our members, a couple of board directors, some staff, and also just friends that have kind of heard of the YWCA, but they might not necessarily be engaged or have a deep understanding of who we are and what we do. And in that workshop, we're just going to tease out broadly, what do people expect from a member-based organisation? What kind of things are people looking for? What activities do they want to engage in? And why might they like to become a member of the YWCA? It's a really competitive space out there. I mean, some people don't like to think of not-for-profit organisations as competing with one another, but the reality is that we're all after people's attention, and that could be fundraising, that could be advocacy support. There's lots of important issues out there and work that needs to be done. So for us, this design thinking workshop will really enable us to be sure that internally we're not just making a bunch of assumptions about what future members might like. And that's something that can be done in half a day. We're lucky here in Canberra, we've got fantastic facilities that are cropping up around the place, like Gungahlin Library, but also places like Entry 29, which is a shared working space, and it's a little demountable building in town, but it's got fantastic facilities. So we'll be down there and going through that workshop, and that will really inform our membership strategy. So I think it's important in terms of, even if research is just you having a chat to a couple of stakeholders, internal or external, that you do that so that you can have some degree of confidence that the goals that you're setting and your strategy is sort of on the right track.
And Chris, what advice would you have to our audience today, be they in Australia or anywhere around the world, around how do you make the most out of getting research when you are squeezed for resources and time and all the other competing priorities you have? Because what I often see with people is that people want to do before they think. They want to go right before they go left in the process. So it's always, we've got to try to get people back. So how are they going to do that? Or what's the best way to do that?
Well, I would say that you've got to have a commitment and understanding that the research and planning phase is as important, if not more important, than the doing phase. And reflecting on what you said before in terms of the word content marketing as well, that's actually, we made a decision internally to call ourselves a communications area rather than a marketing area. And that's because Communities at Work actually, in terms of delivering communications, has lots of different communications we deliver. For instance, we do education and into schools, but also education into the public. We do fundraising, of course. And they all have different goals, different channels, different audiences. So you've got to know what your goals are at the very beginning. And you've got to know who your audience is, and that's vital. And for instance, for something like some of the areas we know inside and out. And the reason is because we've been doing it for a long time. We are close to our audience. We speak to them daily, and I'm thinking of childcare and education, for instance. We know that audience inside and out. that area has been qualitatively and quantitatively studied, so that audience is known. For other areas, for instance, as an example, we recently had a fundraising drive which was around our Care and Share program. It was a clothing sale. So who are we targeting our clothing sale at? Well, this particular one was targeted at women because we only had women's clothes. Then what's the demographic within that? And how do we find that information out? And then once you've got that, what's our goal? What are we trying to achieve? And then, I guess the next step, and this can be where it gets tricky, is finding out where that audience is that you've defined, where are they? So are they in the online world or are they in the offline world? What do they want to hear about? How are they going to be interested in this clothing sale? So it's a process that you need to work on, and I think things like workshopping internally and getting that sort of qualitative measure is good, but you also need some hard numbers around some of these things, and that's where like I guess social media can provide some really hard numbers. For instance, for us, we find that 50% of our web traffic through social media comes from phones and tablets. And currently our website isn't optimised for phones or tablets. So that's a big, red flag for us.
We'll come to platforms in a moment. But just for everyone wanting to join the conversation, just a reminder that the Twitter hashtag is CBR Live. Mike, I'll just throw it back to you because you are a CEO.
Yes.
I'm an officer who works for you. I want to get some money for research. What do I have to have in my submission that comes to you for it to be a yes and not a no, given that you've got a lot of decisions to make with a limited amount of budget? What are the must-haves in any submission to make sure that it's going to work?
I think using that story is a good analogy. They've got to have a story about what are we going to do that's going to make a difference. What's the message we ultimately want to give so that we know we're targeting to the right place. So when someone comes to me and says, Mike, I've got a great idea, we need to do some work on that. I want to understand about what's the investment going to be and how do we get that out at the back end. Dollars are always tight. We have many things I'd like to do, many things we probably should do, but I can't afford to do everything. So it's really about that notion of what's at the back end, what's going to come at the end, and what's the right thing. And there's a tension here because a lot of the work we do is about message. Lifeline nationally, Lifeline locally, of course, believes that suicide is preventable, and our messaging around suicide is right up front and centre. That's quite a difficult message to sell sometimes, but we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that message along the way. However, as we work through the research, sometimes it's really difficult to make sure that message is there. We've got to keep on message. Young people, a very difficult audience to get the message right, because we go into what I call thought leadership groups, and we talk about that, but often we don't have young people in the room, and they're the people who really understand what's happening. So it's really about being diverse. It's really being about, so when someone comes to me and says, Mike, I've got a great idea, I want to know how we're going to do it, where's the return? And it's got to be not necessarily on dollar, return on effort. I'll be doing the right piece of research with the right outcomes.
Joe, we then move, once we've understood who we are, we've gathered all of our inputs, we're really thoughtful about talking to as many people as possible and really shaping up everything that we've got. We've then got to get into our strategic planning because from a content marketing point of view, we need to have objectives. If we don't have objectives, why are we doing it? So what's your process? Now that you've got this design thinking workshop, how are you going to transition those outputs into objectives that are specific, that are measurable, that are achievable, that are realistic and that are time-bound? Because this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the accountability for the content is going to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just on the point before about measuring the outcomes and the talk about hard numbers is a really interesting one. When you're thinking about setting those goals and objectives, what are the most important measures for your organisation? And I think sometimes, particularly with digital communication and social media, people might look at quantitative metrics and sort of say, oh, we got 1,000 likes on such and such page, that's a great outcome. And it might well be that engaging 1,000 people is a meaningful metric for someone.
Maybe, but it could be a vanity metric. Who cares? Because
That's
maybe
right.
you just need 10 or 15. Maybe it's not 1,000.
And so I think more often than not, the value of the relationships that you can build, and you know, the idea of actually building those relationships beyond just a click is a really important one for not-for-profit organisations, because ultimately, you know, we're not out to sell a product or, you know, make a sale. It's about engaging with communities and public so that they, you know, live the organisation's messages and the brand, if you will, and, you know, take it upon themselves to share those messages with their networks. And that's kind of, I guess, where the power comes. But coming back to your point about working through a strategy, I mean, I think once you've kind of understood, okay, what are the needs and interests of these groups that we're trying to engage, it's really looking at, obviously, budget is a really important one, particularly for not-for-profit organisations, but anyone. You know, looking at your resourcing and your internal capacity, you know, what are the skills that people have in your organisation so that you can actually deliver on some of these goals and objectives. And I think, you know, one of the questions that I'm often asked by other people that work in the sector is, oh, we need to do social media, or we need to have a Facebook page. We're not quite sure how to do that. And so I then try and take the conversation back to, well, what are you actually trying to achieve there? You know, are you sure you need a Facebook page? Because other people that you want to engage with actually active on Facebook, or are you asking them to set up yet another digital channel or platform that they have to try and maintain, which is quite a big ask. So yeah, I think there's a range of components, but certainly a strategy that's based on evidence is the way to go.
And if I may, that quantitative versus qualitative is really important. It's wonderful to have something there that you get 1,000 likes. That's great. But if they're not the right people for the message, and indeed the dissemination of that message gets polluted, if you like, by the people who re-send it on, you actually lost the message. You've actually got to make sure the target audience is the right people. We spend a significant amount of time about who we tweet to. No, it's not me, by the way, but the people who do the tweeting is about making sure that we get high worth individuals who are with us are the retweeters. There's no point having someone who really has no interest, who's just pushing a button and sending it. We actually want someone who's on message with us, who says, this is important, and then retweets it. So we actually target people to be, and I'm not sure the right word here, but to be our tweet partners. You know, we ask them that when you get a message from us, add value to it, make sure it goes to the right people. So that's how you build on that. 1,000 likes is wonderful. If they're the wrong 1,000, it doesn't make a difference.
Chris, I see the question there. I think that I'll just pick up from Joe there. It's around capability in organisations. We are in this massive transition, you know, the industrial age, the third industrial age really in many ways, that everyone's now networked and on the grid. Computers are smarter than they've ever been before. Are not-for-profits and community groups keeping up in terms of the skills to be able to capitalise on the wonderful utility that these new technologies have?
Well, obviously I can't speak for all not-for-profits, but I can make a general statement. I'd say in some areas, yes. I'd say we're probably ahead of the game, ahead of the curve. I think if you had the conversation not-for-profits and government, that would be an interesting one, because I think government is struggling with things like social media now and how to really utilise it. I can speak about communities at work, and in terms of social media, for instance, as an organisation, Communities at Work has grown and evolved, and it's only in the last sort of 5 or 6 years that social media has come to the front, and it's traditionally sat in the marketing team, whereas that's not what social media is. Social media isn't a marketing function. Social media is a conversation between people. And so, for instance, in an organisation like ours, I've got a strategy that's over the next however long it takes, let's say 12 months, I'm actually going to take it away from a marketing function and put it into the hands of the people who actually know what they're talking about. So, for instance, if it's the people who are involved in disability services, they have the ability to talk to their clients.
So pushing it to the edges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they can have real conversations,
Sure.
not marketing conversations.
Yeah.
And they're not having somebody like me sit in between them, making the language better again.
Sure.
It's real conversations. And that's what something like social media is about, building that capability, which I think was your question, is where you need a plan. So sometimes those people who are delivering those services aren't the same people who are on Facebook.
Is it a priority in your organisation to ensure, because really where you're moving to in terms of that dispersed model is away from the centralised, away from marketing, it's really that social business discussion, which is really about how do you use the new technologies to enable all sorts of things, not just the marketing component. But is there that priority within your organisation?
It's a priority because it helps us to build a couple of things, names that we've said this morning, ambassadors and supporters, and people that will spread our message for us. So those are the people that we want to connect with, those are the people that we want to engage with and build relationships with. And they don't build relationships with marketing people, they don't build relationships with a brand, they build relationships with people. So to be able to build those relationships, and I think the other thing that was mentioned was the longevity of this. It's not a transaction, we're not building transactional based outcomes, we're building long-term capacity and capability. So for instance, talking about strategy as well, that's very much part of our strategic planning, is not just looking at this thing, this event, this campaign, looking at how that builds into the next one and the next one and the next one and how we're going to evolve that. So having a long-term picture.
All right, just another reminder that if you would like to join us here on in the Gungahlin Library, the ACT Government's digital hub, join us via Twitter on #CBRLive. And we do have a tweet. It's from the Gungahlin Community Council, which is a not-for-profit organisation comprised of volunteer community representatives, and it's funded by a small ACT government grant. So you've got to sing for your supper here, guys. We want some consulting advice. And the question, or the problem is, and really this is, it's about solving problems, really. It's not just about the technology and about other things, it's about adding value. So, the Gungahlin Community Council, they produce a bi-monthly newsletter covering local issues. In a rapidly growing area, there's now 17,500 residences. They face major cost issues in distributing hard copies to the local population. How can the Gungahlin Community Council transition our readers from the hard copy to the website? And a second question is, how can they utilise Facebook more effectively? I'll start with you, Joe. How do we get from the offline world to the online world? You can think about it, Mike.
Thank you.
The first question that I would probably ask is, are they sure that they need to try and transition these communities from offline into online?
They can't afford the magazine, the place is growing, every time the printing press presses, it's costing more and more. That's, their little tiny grant is disappearing and they don't want to spend it on print.
Okay, and we need to save trees, it's true. Well, you know, again, I think starting with a little bit of research, you know, I'm sure that there's loads of events that happen in this community here. Go around and chat to some people, have a set of key questions about what websites do you access, do you use Facebook, you know, who are their target audience? You know, if they're trying to reach a younger crowd, then, you know, potentially Facebook could be the place to go. But, you know, if it's about driving people to their website, again, set up some analytics. There's lots of free tools out there, Google Analytics, do your research, test some things. I mean, I think sometimes, you know, strategy is great, but people kind of, you know, tie themselves up and think, you know, we've got to get this right 100%. I'm a big fan of testing things on a small scale, and if they work, upscaling those approaches. So yes, social media tools like Facebook are great because they're free to set up. But yeah, just go around and chat to the community and find out where they actually get their news from, where they like to go, and how they do that. I mean, we mentioned mobile, and I know that we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you know, thinking about whether they actually are mobile users predominantly, is that how they access the internet on a day-to-day basis? So yeah, that would be my advice off the top of my head.
Okay, Ziz?
I feel like I'm going backwards here. You need a classic community engagement strategy. You need to understand who that community is. So if it's 17,500 people living here, how many of those
17,500 homes.
Homes, yeah. Who actually wants that content and how do they want to receive it? So I'd take a slight step back, do the research, and then think about how you then get out there. And I'll be looking for community champions. I'd say, once I understand the demographics of where those homes are, looking for some sub-centres and then getting them out to say, well, how do you want to receive it? Do you still want it in the letterbox? And some people will. There'll still be a cost there. Some people, particularly here in Gungahlin now, it's part of the NBN, are quite happy to have it streamed straight into their front door via some pipe. So it's just getting that understanding of what they really need. I certainly wouldn't cut off the paper because there's still people who like to feel the content. You know, they like to look at the pictures. Sure, you can do that online, but people are doing it variously online. I think PCs are almost dead. It is now into tablets and phones. And I know we're going to keep talking about that in a minute, but we're all still talking about an online presence, and I don't think we're quite right yet. I still think we've not got it yet.
Okay. Chris, your advice to the Gungahlin Community Council. How can they keep more of their funding for the work that they want to do rather than paying it to a printer?
Well, I would reflect on what we were talking about before and what's been said in terms of research and understanding your audience. So you could do that in a number of ways. For instance, you could go out with a survey with the next 17,500 that goes out saying how many of you would like to receive this digitally as opposed to print. And I guess part of that is you can tell the story then. You can also tell the story of cost. You can tell the story of sustainability, and you can engage your readers as part of the solution. So if they feel they're part of the solution, that's also a benefit as well long term. So that might be, you might get to a situation where half of them say, I really like the print version, but the other half say, you know what, I'll get it digitally, I'm happy to go get it digitally. And then you can start forming a strategy about how to implement that. The technical details or technical way to get it online is actually quite easy. Technically, you have to invest in it, both in time and money. But technically, putting a document like that online is really quite easy. Putting it in a format that you can flip through on your iPad, not too difficult. But you want to make sure that the audience is with you on that journey.
Interesting point. Sorry, Mike.
So I think you've got to also value add online. I think if all you're going to do is reproduce the book, I've got a copy in my hand, I'm seeing exactly the same thing, and I agree with Chris, it's got to have the whole bunch of easy compatibilities that it's flick. But you need it also to have some value add. So if there's, thinking about the role they have, if there's a series of plans in there in black and white in a book, I'd like to roam around that in 3D online because it's easier to do. You can't do that with a book. So what's the advantage of me looking at it on my iPad? What's the advantage of looking at it on my phone? What's the advantage of online? If not, people will stick with the book. If it's just the same as the book, it doesn't make a difference. If there's something else, I'm getting some value out of it, I'll play around in there. And indeed, the feedback stuff is really powerful because you can track it through metrics to say, yep, they did go down the 3D path. They did look at this. They did look at that. And that tells you what to do next time.
Okay, well, I hope that that's of some value to our good friends at the Gungahlin Community Council, and I'm sure it will be. One thing, and as we move through our methodology, our content marketing methodology, we've already spoken about the importance of audience, and we keep coming back to the importance of audience. And if I could recommend to people a book by Jeff Rawes, it's called Audience. Have a look at it online, get online Amazon and download it. It's pretty cheap as an ebook, and it's a great book, and he really gets into the audience, because for mine, this is the key thing. Yep. Because you really do need to understand your audience and who they are, where they are, what their attitudes are, what are they prepared to do, what are they not prepared to do. So there has to be a fundamental understanding of that audience before you then start opening any channels up or publishing any sort of content. So Ziz, what are your fail-safe mechanisms to really understand your audiences?
I think it's back to that community engagement, understanding them. You've got to keep trying things. I think you do things once and see how it works and you get feedback. And that's the most important thing. Are we getting it fundamentally right? Are we adding quality? Going back to let's not just publish a document online. It's the same as having the real thing. You've got to add value in there. So you've really got to understand that audience. Is your message getting through? And what are the feedback loops to convince you, if you like, that the message is getting there? And that is really in terms of how they come back to you. So Facebook, of course, and tweeting and being just fundamentally online and all those other things nowadays, you can use all those, but you need to see the feedback loop. So they're checking in to say, yep, this is what we want. And oh, by the way, you could do better by, I wouldn't mind seeing this. If you're not doing 3D imagery, let's have some 3D. I'd like to see more stuff on YouTube. Just asking them, what is it you want? Just checking in all the time. You do want them to keep coming back time and time again because the technology changes every day.
Sure. But Joe, a question. Interestingly, in the most recent research that was completed by the Content Marketing Institute, the #1 content marketing tactic are events. So it's offline. So we need to be always mindful that there is online, and yes, it's the flavour of the day, but there is offline. Mm-hmm. How do you use offline events to understand your audience a little bit better so as that you're getting your story right?
Yeah, I think, and Chris mentioned earlier, an integrated approach to communication, and I think that's really what it's all about. You know, we're not just talking about digital comms here, we're talking about traditional media as well. We're talking about face-to-face events, and they are very, very important, obviously, and a fantastic and very easy way to actually engage face-to-face and to hear what people are saying, completely unmediated. I mean, there's a lot of talk, I guess, in the kind of communication theory world about, you know, the dialogic paradigm that we're in at the moment. You know, we've kind of moved away from that broadcast or single direction kind of communication. And yes, you know, digital is a great way to have a real-time conversation with somebody, but there's still a layer there. You know, and face-to-face events, I think, you know, you can pick up on all the nuances of the body language and what someone's articulating. So those are really important. I mean, at the YWCA, we have an incredible events calendar that scares me, but you know, the beauty of those events is that not only can you sort of, you know, get a feel for perhaps it's your members and how they're feeling about the work that you're doing and the issues of the day, but you can use those events as the content that you're then you know, delivering through whatever channels that you use. So, you know, video is a great one, but, you know, again, things like Twitter at events, really, really interesting to see how some NGOs have picked that up as a kind of way to tell the story of what's happening at their events and their face-to-face engagement, and also handing over the channel, in a sense, to the audience and asking them to tell the story, you know. I think people, you know, we have talked about people like to connect with people, not a piece of technology, and that's really important. And while the tech is an enabler at events and, you know, can help you reach audiences that are beyond that room or that physical space that you're in, you know, we can't forget about the human element here, which is in fact the most powerful aspect of what we're talking about today.
Chris, Joe raises an interesting point for mine around the creation of content and the atomisation of content. So when you do create a piece of content, how many ways can you use that? Todd Wheatland from Kelly Services, their global head of thought leadership, who's just moved back to Australia, a very, very talented target content marketer, talks about this and how do you get the most out of a piece of content. So again, for our audience, wherever they may be, here, around Australia, around the world, how do they make the most out of a piece of content?
Well, I've seen a very good model about this, and essentially, it's the model is you can use 2 pieces of content for your whole year, and the way that you break that down.
Wow.
So, for instance, if you're delivering a white paper on a specific topic, you can break that down into themes, and you can deliver podcasts on those themes. You can deliver video on those themes. You can deliver additional content through whichever channels you decide through those themes, whichever channels are applicable to your audience and to your goals, of course. And essentially that atomisation is breaking down that original piece of content into the bits that matter to the person you're trying to connect with. The benefit of that is that that little bit of content actually relates to this big bit. So 1, you're not creating new content, and 2, you're connecting that person here with the big picture. So there's great value in that.
In terms of another question that we have from the hashtag CBR Live, so if you would like to send through another question. You're back to work, guys. You're back into the consulting world here. We have a question. How much of a financial budget should not-for-profits spend on a website? Now that's probably how long is a piece of string, but really I suppose maybe perhaps as a percentage of a marketing budget? I'll leave it up to you, and Chris, away you go. Give us an answer to that.
Well, I'm gonna couch it in a whole. You're
not
bunch.
going to answer the question.
Essentially, it's how long is a piece of string? It's you have to go back to your goals and your strategy and where it fits in with all of that. And for some, a website might not be that valuable, and for some, it might be the pivotal thing which everything hangs from. And if you have determined that it is this pivotal part of your entire communication strategy, then you better invest in it. Because otherwise you will get to a situation where it's not keeping up with what you want to achieve. And that's, again, taking that long-term view that in a couple of years you better build something that's going to at least last a couple of years and that you can build on further. On the converse, if it's something that is essentially an information portal, another piece, and, you know, if most of what you do is face-to-face, for instance, it might not be as important. If you actually want to deliver a lot of digital content, if you wanted to have a blog, if you think that's really important strategically, then invest in it and invest significantly in it.
Okay, good answer. All right, what we'll do now is keep moving, and we'll move into the next part of making some decisions about what types of content we're going to use. We've done our strategic planning, we're through our research, we've got our plan, we've got our objectives, we know where we're going, we understand our audience better than they know themselves. So now we have to try to hit those objectives, and we've got to use content, and we're going to use content marketing to achieve that. We can use video, audio, stills, text, graphics. We've got all sorts of, arrows in our quiver to use. Joe, how do you go about making some decisions, and obviously understanding that decisions around budgets are going to be really important, and certainly when we get into the publishing side of things as well. But how do you make decisions about what sorts of media you use?
Yes, budget is a very important consideration there, because while digital tools are becoming more affordable, there still is a lot of time that goes into writing a piece of content, creating a piece of video, for example, or even deploying one of your members of staff to an event to take photos, for example. Again, coming back to that audience factor of how do they like to receive their information? What is going to be the most engaging way that you can reach out to those people? That will also be a factor. And I think for the NGOs that maybe they don't have a comms person at all, I think we're all pretty lucky to be part of organisations where communication has been recognised as a priority. The content curation side of things is a really interesting one. So if you don't have the capacity to necessarily create your own video or to create your own photo gallery online, or potentially even write a blog post, looking at what your audience wants and actually sort of saying, okay, well, what exists out there? How can I do the hard work for the audience, do their research for them, and actually grab a whole bunch of content that's very relevant to them and deliver it to them that way. So that's kind of one of the ways that you can overcome the challenge of, we'd love to do video, for example, we've got no in-house resources, we certainly don't have the money to contract out to somebody. Let's look at messages and content that's already out there that we can maybe comment on and curate for our audience.
Mike, how do you draw on your audience to perhaps co-create some content with you? Because as Joe said, there's creation, there's co-creation, and there's curation. So we know where we are with those other two. But do you draw, blog posts and perhaps podcasts, some other pieces of content from your audience?
I think the answer is yes, we do. For me, it's about keeping it simple, the old KISS principle. The danger is that you try and do too much with a piece of content and you end up having this mishmash of messages that get lost along the way. I think when we look at the audience, we understand our message ourselves very well, and we agree about how best to get it there, we go for simple, straightforward, direct to that audience, and you may go with only one modality, one channel. Certainly you want to do that in a way you can build on it, but I think the danger today is that people look at things and they say, oh, we must do video, we must have a tweet, we must have, it must be on Facebook, and we'll put it on our website, and the CEO's got to trot out and talk about it. The problem is, with all those different channels, it costs a lot of money, a lot of time, and it may not be effective use of your money and your time. So I'm a great believer in let's come back. So if we want to target young people and it's about self-harm, what's the message around that? Let's get to young people in a singular way first and then build on it. And the best people to decide that are the young people. So how do we get that feedback engagement loop to make sure that when we take the arrow from our quiver and we shoot it, whatever it be, they come back and say, yep, it got me, or no, it actually missed. So we go to them and get that back. And then once that works, you can build on it. And I think in the not-for-profit, you've really got to be careful you don't overdo it, don't gild the lily, because otherwise they go, oh, I've been bombarded with all this stuff. You've shot 15 arrows at me and only one just wounded me, and I don't really know what you're trying to say to me anymore.
We'll come back to that in a moment, because I think that's another absolutely critical part of effective content marketing is what is your publishing cadence? What does your audience want to hear from you? Sometimes they don't want to hear from you every day of the week. Maybe they don't want to see you all the time. Maybe it's... So again, how do we work that out? We'll come back to that in a moment, but we've got another question, this time from my good friend Kanchan Dutt. And Kanchan, thanks very much for joining us. The hashtag again, everyone, CBR Live, if you'd like to send through a question. And Chris, I'll throw this to you. I'm sure you're very familiar with Mr. Kanchan Dutt. How do not-for-profits work with government to deliver content? And has digital media changed this?
Oh, tough one. How do not-for-profits work with government to deliver content? I think the not-for-profit sector and the government sector work hand in hand very well in many areas. In some areas they have different risk profiles and different goals, and they don't match up. And I think sometimes communications is one of those areas. Very often we work with government on a defined goal. For instance, if it's a project that we are working on together, if it's either a government funded project or a project that we would decided to work on together, because support goes both ways with government, then we decide to do that, and we generally do it in a, I would say, less integrated way than I would prefer. I don't think we're quite there yet. That'd be my answer. I don't have the answer quite yet.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that one. But again, I think there's, the not-for-profit and the government sector. Really, it's an ongoing engagement that has to take place, and perhaps there are real opportunities as the technological change continues to happen, as behaviours continue to change. That intersection between government and the not-for-profit and community sector really just needs to continue to get stronger and stronger to help us to build healthy and sustainable communities. But Joe, back onto our pathway through our methodology, we're going to look at publishing and that understanding of, okay, we understand who we are, we've gone all the way through it, we've now made some selections about what we're going to do because we know our audience. Are you good at planning your publishing, or are you a reactive publisher? Do you get ahead of it? Are you strategic in your publishing, or are you not strategic in your publishing?
To be perfectly honest with you, I think it's a bit of a mix, because while we can set our strategy in place and even a content plan, and that could be a 12-month content plan if you're really organised, but there are always going to be things that you need to respond to, and government announcements are one of those things. So you kind of you need to be prepared for those issues to come up and be opportunistic and respond. But certainly having an idea of, for example, if your NGO has a quarterly newsletter, as we do, sort of planning ahead and going, okay, well, what's in our calendar, what's on the government radar, what's happening in the corporate world that might impact on us, and how can we plan ahead for those key pieces of content. But again, you're not always in a position where you can plan ahead, but that's what a good strategy should cater for, I think. Yeah.
Oh, look,
Mike, for you, your publishing calendar, are you good, bad, indifferent, something, all work required?
More work required. How's that? More work required. I think the reality is we have a cyclical nature to our events, to opportunities through the year, and we plan for those. But keep going back to your analogy, we always keep a couple of arrows in our quiver for when we need to respond to what's happening in the community. So core to our business, of course, is suicide. So when there's a very public expression of grief around a suicide, as we had recently, we need to be ready for that, because when it happens out of the blue, and we need to respond appropriately. It needs to be well thought out. It can't be reactive. So we have a couple of things always in our back pocket, in our quiver, ready to go. So in the sense of being planned, it's pretty okay, but absolutely we need to do better. I think the challenge is the environment's continually changing. So I agree, planning 12 months out, I think that's what we do. The reality is in 12 months' time, I'm not sure where Facebook will be in 6 weeks' time, let alone 12 months' time. I'm not sure if Twitter's the thing of tomorrow. So we've got to be careful we don't over-plan, because things they will change.
And Chris, for you, how is your editorial calendar? Yep. Is it in good shape?
It is. So because we are so diverse, it gives us, I guess, benefits and challenges. The benefits are that we've got lots of content pouring in. The challenge is, how do we message that on the way out, and how do we ensure there's some sort of consistency? From using marketing terminology, how do we ensure it's branded properly? How do we ensure that the messages going out have a theme?
Do you have strategies for Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, SlideShare, the various channels? Are you doing different things in different places?
We do. We don't actually use SlideShare yet, but we're getting there. So for YouTube we find is a good way to tell stories. So we've got a couple of examples on there. We've put some videos up on YouTube about some of our clients telling their stories. And other examples, so for Facebook, that's much more around engaging with not our clients specifically, the whole community. It might be our clients, it might be our volunteers, it might be our donors. So that's really an engagement, personal engagement. And again, the tricky thing with our Facebook page is, how do we tell all of our story, because we have such a diverse story, and how do we ensure that we connect with the right people, and how do we ensure we're not telling different things or the wrong things to different people. So it is tricky, but we do have a strategy around all of them. Twitter is an immediate engagement tool, and we use it a lot at events and doing things like hashtags. So that has that sort of engagement. We do a bit of curating as well through Twitter, and retweeting and supporting, and our supporters support us through Twitter as well.
Joe, have you found that you've been able to prove to your executive that your efforts in content marketing are impacting your business?
Very good question. So we're actually at a point where we're developing our next communication strategy, where I will be setting those goals and objectives, looking at what we're trying to do and looking at how we're going to measure that when the time comes. So I can get back to you on that one. But I think, again, just in terms of the idea of planning for content, I know that Blackboard did a study recently of NGO content marketers in the US. There was about 1,500 of them that were surveyed. And about 90% of them said, yep, we're doing content marketing, but less than 25% of those people had a strategy to back it up. So I think, the tools are out there, and NGOs certainly seem to be, diving in and taking advantage of those. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure how many of us are really there in terms of measuring the impact of that activity that we've been engaged in. So,
work to be done, Mike.
This is almost a question back to Chris, so I apologise, Chris, straight away. You talked about how you've got lots of content and pouring it in and then picking the right channels and having some control. Reflecting on a comment you made earlier where, in fact, a lot of this information is now being shared on the periphery of organisations through different channels out there. Last year we had a group set themselves up who had a contra-argument to our position, and they were very effectively using Twitter and Facebook to have that debate. And it's quite interesting, as you allow information to go out there, to be used out there, you start losing control over some of the messages, and particularly in all our spaces, but in one of the spaces we do around suicide prevention, you've got to keep on message, because harm can be done when you get off message. There's harm to people to be had in Facebook if it gets off message. So the challenge for us is to allow the message to be there and plan for that, but also somehow own control, yet people on the periphery, who we're empowering, by the way, by giving them information to use. There's some challenges in that as well.
Okay, a final question that we've received from Twitter, and again, we're back into the consulting role for you, and Chris, I'll throw this to you. Apart from traditional forms of fundraising, how best can corporate companies become involved in not-for-profits?
Look, there's for an organisation like ours, and I'm sure it's the same, there are many ways that we can get support. I'm not going to say that money's not great, because money is good, and money's the real thing that keeps us going for our charity programs. But of course there's things like volunteering, which are integral to an organisation like ours. We've got 300 plus volunteers that work right across the organisation, right across Canberra. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without the volunteers. There's corporate support, and I think a big thing about the volunteering, the corporate support, is moving away from let's come and paint the fence or dig the hole, and let's actually use the expertise you've got in-house. So some of the organisations that we work with, who might be IT professionals or other, we can actually use their skills, which is much more valuable to us than them painting a fence or digging a hole. So there's that sort of thing. There's always in-kind support, of course, which is valuable. There's support through advocacy and partnerships and promoting us in other ways. I could keep going, but there's many ways that the corporate organisation can support not-for-profits.
Jo?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything Chris has just said. It made me think about our most recent Christmas appeal, and we were sort of chatting to local businesses because we really wanted to get them engaged in what we were doing, which was essentially fundraising. But we also know that, you know, times aren't the easiest at the moment for businesses, and particularly the little guys. So I was having a conversation with a lovely lady called Chrissy, who runs V-Spot Cafe, and she said, well, look, we can't give you guys money, but maybe our customers can. And, you know, she said, you know, they're often kind of coming to us saying that they'd like to do more in the community, but they're not quite sure how they can help. And so, you know, she arranged so that her customers could go and pick up one of our shopping bags with a shopping list. Her customers went away and they filled up the bags of food, brought them back, and we took those down to our Lanyon Food Hub, which is an emergency food relief service. So, you know, I think we've got to think a little bit laterally about these things sometimes. While, you know, fundraising is really important for NGOs, I think that there's other ways that, you know, corporates can get involved and make a real difference.
Mike, just quickly from you.
We're an organisation of volunteers, 14 staff, 550 volunteers. So when we work with the corporate sector, we're keen to see how they might support us, our volunteers, in delivering those services. So while cash is king, recognising that's not always easy, there's two things people can do. They can help us support our volunteers to deliver that job, and as Chris mentioned, all the ways. But also, we're now getting the message out there. Some of those organisations have huge networks of their own. The retweeting, so we're very keen to have people retweet our message, who use our Facebook as a bounce-off point to get our message out there, who will take our message to their employees, their customers, their communities, to say that Lifeline Canberra is doing something great for the community. You can all help. We're already of the community, for the community, because we're fundamentally volunteers, but the more volunteers we have doing just one thing makes a huge difference.
All right, well, at that point, I think we will conclude our panel discussion for today on content marketing for community organisations and not-for-profits. But there are a few things that I'd like to say as in my concluding remarks. The first thing is that if you are interested in content marketing, you can do no better than log on to the Content Marketing Institute at www.contentmarketinginstitute.com. Joe Paluzzi and the team there have led the way in education in content marketing. And if you're able to get on there and understand content marketing a little bit deeply, I think it will really help because there are an enormous amount of resources there. There is also Content Marketing World in Sydney, which starts in March 31. So if you do want to get involved in an event, and I can tell you that it's very worthwhile to be there. I've been there a couple of times. I go to America every year to Content Marketing World, and you come away with so much rich information. And when we talk about a content marketing event being the #1 content marketing tactic, it is getting involved with people. Blackboard, the research that was mentioned, that was also put together by Fusion Spark Media and Russell and Kenneth Sparkman, who run Fusion Spark Media. Fusionspark.com. Lots of information again there and lots of insights for not-for-profit and community organisations. So to thank Mike Zisler, Joe Allabone, and also to Chris, thanks very much for joining us. We will be back next month in the next program in our series of content marketing for community organisations, not-for-profits, and for the government sector. And could I thank the team at Content Group, and also to thank the ACT government and Gavin Tapp in particular for the work he's done in bringing to life the digital hub here at the Gungahlin Library. Thanks very much.